Welcome everybody. Lovely to see you. We're just letting some more people in. It looks like we've got an echo somewhere. If you could all go on mute. It looks like we're quite light on attendance today. Probably people have started to go on their summer holidays, but welcome. It's very good to see you this morning. We've just got 9 people in the waiting room, so can we just let them in? Thank you for your patience. We're just down to 2 people. Right, we'll make a start. More people are coming in. Thank you. Can I just do a reminder at the beginning, just some housekeeping rules. Can everybody be polite to each other? No slander. Please think carefully about what you say and to treat each other with respect. We also have some elections coming up. 7 candidates are standing in the Communities and Education Division, which is marvellous. But those candidates will not be able to speak at today's meeting. So thank you, those candidates, for your understanding. Can we say a massive thank you because Richard Pater, the CEO of BICOM, is here to join us today. He's going to speak about the situation in Israel, and he's very happy to take questions. There's going to be a maximum of half an hour for this, so I hope that we can hand over the floor to Richard and again say thank you, and then afterwards I'm happy to either tell you who wants to ask a question, or if you can see them, it's up to you, however many are asked. So over to you, Richard.
I'm unmuted. Okay, great. Marie, thank you very much indeed for having me, and thank you all. It's lovely to see some familiar faces and to meet the rest of you as well. I just start as well by kind of thanking all of you collectively for the board. I think of the kind of sensible and calibrated approach that you've taken to this issue. And so kind of in full support for the positions that you've taken so far. What I'll try and do just in kind of my opening comments is to talk about a little bit about the latest agenda law that passed last week, what the government's agenda was, what the opposition are saying about that, and then talk about the repercussions in terms of the economy, military preparedness, legal avenues that may follow, political fallout, and effects on society as well. And then I'll pause and happily take any questions. So for a start, just to be clear of what we're talking about, the legislation that was passed last week, we're talking about a legislative amendment to a basic law which cancels the court's ability to overrule government decisions and appointments on the grounds of reasonability. The reasonably standard, that is what is being cancelled. In terms of the government, they would probably argue 2 or 3 points in favour of why they're doing it. First of all, the relevance of reasonability was the reason given by the court of why they cancelled the appointment of Aryeh Deri, a very close ally, the leader of the Shas party and one of Netanyahu's key allies over the last decade or so. And so there was kind of a very specific and immediate need to challenge that in order potentially to lead to his reappointment to the cabinet. The second point, that I think out of all the plans that Justice Minister Levine presented back in January, they thought that this reasonability was the most vague, and that it didn't appear in any other legal system. The UK system, for example, does not rely or have the necessity to rely on any form of reasonability. It has other statutes and protocol and precedent in place. And I think, third of all, that they thought that this would actually be the least damaging and perhaps the least controversial of all the plans that they were passing forward. However, I think this is for me a key point, that what they misjudged was that the way that the opposition and the protesters kind of resonated the idea of reasonability precisely for the reason that they perceived this government to be so unreasonable in the extreme. and kind of pointing to the fact that there are extremists and people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich to a degree, but certainly Ben-Gvir holding his position of minister over the police due to his background and his kind of his radical incitement in the past. It's kind of the kind of the chutzpah of all chutzpahs in terms of what's reasonable for the government to do. I think the second reason, which resonates for a lot more of the Israeli public, not just those protesting, but the fact that this is a slippery slope. The proof that with a majority of 64 out of 120 MKs, this government can basically pass anything they want. And if they do proceed, then that kind of imposes a much bigger danger to Israeli democracy further down the road. Third of all, perhaps more significantly than the what, is the how that it was, as I said, that this was pushed through in terms of a unilateral move. It led after the failure of the compromise talks that were being facilitated in the president's residence, and that fell apart about 6 weeks ago over the agreement to elect the panel to the Judicial Selection Committee. So there was already a lot of bad faith. I think the fifth reason of why the protests caught onto this is there was no good reason of why the rush. Kind of an artificial deadline was set at the end of this month when the Knesset went into to summer recess, but the government were insistent to approve it, partly perhaps to show some political dividend for their rule and not to be seen as kind of completely powerless. But there was no real kind of pressing need to pass this, especially given all the other far more pressing and relevant issues around here. So to talk about kind of the fallout now and kind of what happens next. First of all, the question is whether the government will test this law anytime soon. Will they try and for example, reappoint Derry to the cabinet? There's no suggestion that this is immediate, but this certainly could follow in the weeks and months ahead. Other ideas, kind of because the appointments are now unable to be cancelled over reasonability, a lot of pressure to fire the Attorney General, who was appointed by the former government and has taken a real bashing by many members of this government minister, kind of that are pushing back on kind of the reasonability of some of her comments. The other fallouts, if I look at go through the various factors, the economy, people would have seen the day after the law was passed, 3 international heavyweight financial institutions all came out against it, threatening to lower Israel's credit rating. That would have an enormous knock-on effect. I think if I can encapsulate some of the words last night from Professor Yaakov Frankel, the former head of the Bank of Israel, who talked in the demonstration in Tel Aviv last night, and he talked about how economic growth was suffering, how the shekel has been devalued, how the investments have collapsed, the stock market has been seriously limited, and the high-tech sector kind of are looking for investments to move abroad. All these factors paint a very negative picture from the economic perspective. On the security front, first of all, I think it's worth a word of praise for the head of the opposition, Lapid, who made a very clear statement against the people that were potentially refusing to serve or those that were stopping volunteering in the IDF reserves, that he told them to wait until the judicial procedure has fully gone through and whether the High Court overruled this, and not to prevent service, stop their service at this point. And that was seen as also as a measured and responsible statement to make. However, there are major concerns over the loss of deterrence, the idea that Israel's enemies are rubbing their hands in glee at the kind of the implosion within Israeli society. Operationally, if there are people that's not yet reached critical mass, but the fear is that various very significant sectors of the IDF may stop reporting for duty, that will then have a operational knock-on effect. And overall, the unity amongst the ranks has definitely been disturbed and caused a fissure in Israeli society, which is also being felt within the ministry. The Israeli intelligence put out a briefing on Thursday or Friday, where they clarified kind of the 4 legs of Israel's traditional deterrent stance: the strength of the IDF, the alliance with the US, the strength of Israel's economy, and the internal social cohesion. All 4 of those legs have been damaged by this legislation, and that's obviously a real concern for all of us that are concerned about Israeli security. In terms of the next steps legally, we've now seen appeals have gone in to the Supreme Court to repeal this law, and certainly they've scheduled a hearing for September. Although even this morning I've heard that they may even bring this hearing forward. I've heard three theories on the grounds of which the Supreme Court could knock back and cancel this legislation. One is the fact that they could argue that protocol wasn't followed. There wasn't a full enough hearing by the security establishment. The Foreign Affairs Defence Committee never had a session to discuss the security implications of this law. Famously, Prime Minister Netanyahu avoided having a briefing with the IDF Chief of Staff on the morning of the vote and only waited till afterwards. So perhaps a question mark over if protocol was fully followed. Another argument by the court could be that just to outrule it as simply unconstitutional, even though Israel doesn't have a written constitution, it would kind of go against the basic values and core principles that the state has stood for to now. And a third reason could be that it's kind of an excessive abrogation of power by the Knesset, and an abuse of their constitutive and legislative authority, in which they don't have to rule on this. And this also strikes a chord. The government in the last couple of weeks have used an article by one of the Supreme Court judges, Judge Solberg, to present that this is kind of has some form of a consensus within the judiciary. And Solberg himself came out very harshly, very rare occurrence, but came out harshly against the government spin and said that this article talked about imposing on the lawyers, the judges themselves, kind of to limit their use of it, but never for a moment thought that this should be passed actually into legislation. In terms of the political ramifications, I think within the Israeli government, I think it's fair to say that the government is talking in two voices now. There are those that the hardliners backing from Minister Levin and some of the other hard right members of the coalition, who are pushing that this is only the first stage of the judicial reform. However, more and more voices within the Likud over the weekend have been coming out and saying that up until now and no further, and if we want to be making any more changes to the judicial system, that it has to be done with a consensus. This kind of chimes with the promises that was reportedly made in the conversation between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden. So all of this talks to the idea that they've made this kind of symbolic first move, and now they need to row back and they need to understand that all of this needs to be done in the future within a consensus, at least with the opposition or broad public understanding. A final couple of comments on the society, and I think one of the most positive aspects to come out of this has been the vibrancy of grassroots democracy and the Israelis coming out protesting. Last weekend, for example, over 500,000 Israelis came out on the streets across the country. This would be the equivalent in proportional terms of 3.5 million Brits coming out and protesting. Overwhelmingly peaceful. I think that's important also to note. There have been some recent cases over the last week of excessive police violence, which is obviously a concern. And I think the longer that Ben-Gvir serves in as police minister, the more and more that there will be policemen looking to win favour in the minister's eyes potentially and carry out kind of more aggressive policy than perhaps should be in place. However, again, the government would argue that no state can accept illegal blocking of the main arteries in terms of transportation and the need for police or ambulances or fire engines, etc., to get through. So therefore, it's the necessity of the state to open up the arteries even when they are blocked by peaceful protesters. And finally, I'd say that the repercussions for the international community are also concerned. We saw actually quite a balanced, reasonable statement, I think, from the British government, but the US government has been quite clear about what they feel about these things, and kind of similarly from the European allies as well. Israel just had a meeting of the Israel foreign minister who was due to fly to Bahrain this week, cancelled allegedly for scheduling reasons, but I think we all understand that part of this is behind the scenes concern amongst Israel's allies, both near and far, of where this is taking us. So I'll stop that overview there and happily take any of your questions.
Thank you very much. So let's see, has anybody got any questions? We normally have lots of questions.
Yeah, we have Dori Schmetring and then Dan Koski and then Phil Rosenberg.
Thank you. And Keith Appleby, I can now see. And Stab and Chaim Stanton. Okay, we've got lots of questions.
Can we unmute Dory, please?
Hello. Right. Sorry, a bit of confusion here about this muting and unmuting. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for that introduction. My question actually is, to what extent is there a similarity or parallel between this Israeli government legislation about, about the Supreme Court and the British government's attempts to limit the power of the British Supreme Court or the English Supreme Court to say something about the deportation to Rwanda policy?
I mean, a difficult one. I'm not a legal expert. I'm kind of more focused on Israeli society and commentary there. So I would defer to others in terms of the exact parallel here. But what I would say is that, listen, there is an argument within Israeli society that draws on other analogies, perhaps closer to the UK, that suggests why an issue that was pretty peripheral to the main concerns of Israeli society. I mean, even to remind people, when the Prime Minister made his opening statement when this government was sworn in, he highlighted 4 issues on the top of his priority: obviously combating Iran, expanding the notion of the Abraham Accords and regional peace, fighting the cost of living, and fighting for personal security. And nowhere was it mentioned, this judicial reform. It came as a kind of perhaps as a surprise for many people when the Justice Minister presented it unilaterally. And there's been a lot of pushback within the Likud already to say that, that these things need to be done with a consensus, even within the ruling party, and not just one minister leading an agenda and taking the country down this such a divisive and destructive route. So that's where we are here. I'd be cautious about any other kind of analogies with other countries.
Thank you. Can I mention we've got 14 minutes left and there's a lot of speakers, so not everybody unfortunately is going to be able to ask a question. So I'm not sure from the board team who's doing the unmuting, if that can be confirmed, but we're not going to be able to answer all the questions. So just the next person who put their hand up, I've got it on my screen as Dan Koski, and then I'd like to take people that don't often speak. So Chaim, I don't think you often speak, or Keith Appleby. Dan.
Hi there. Thanks very much. Good to see you, Richard, and thank you very much for your analysis there. This is obviously like an incredibly difficult watch from afar. As I'm sure you're aware, there are protests that have been taking place here in London, obviously across the world. They are overwhelmingly Israeli expats. And I wondered if what you think might be the role, if any, of Jewish communities, obviously here in the UK, but abroad as well, as this process unfolds.
Thanks, Dan. I mean, I'll be very careful about answering that, especially with such an esteemed audience that I'm speaking to. And I'd say, as an Israeli citizen, first of all, a little bit of humility that because of the kind of the self-imposed kind of discourse and problematic grievances within Israeli society, I'd be very careful to prescribe what diaspora should be doing. But broadly speaking, in the same vein that the Israeli protests have taken off, that capturing or reclaiming the symbols of a proud Zionist state, the flag, the singing of Hatikva, I think that's kind of entirely appropriate for diaspora communities in a similar way to embrace and show that their love of the state, and that they're doing this out of a position of love and concern. And obviously kind of the full Zionist responses for as many of you eventually to make Aliyah and have your influence here on the ground as well.
Thank you. And for those of you who don't get your questions answered, the President's statement is next, so I can come on to you for you to say whatever you want to afterwards. Chaim, you don't often speak. Welcome. You'll have
who
to
was
come
that,
off.
Marie? Marie, who was that?
Chaim Stanton. He's signalling to us.
There you go.
I'm unmuted. And thank you very much, Richard, for coming to speak to us. I just wanted to see if you thought there was any sort of perhaps comparison between the current reform protests and the Gush Katif, because we saw sort of Ariel Sharon making a new political party and having a sort of rabbinic curse against him during the evacuation of the Gush Katif. And you can see the videos of soldiers dragging settlers out of their houses. And there was an orange campaign where people tied orange ribbons, and there was a blue campaign where people tied blue ribbons. So I was just wondering if you thought there was some form of comparison in the respective controversies, and any lessons we could take from the Gush Katif controversies and carry them forwards in terms of instilling a sense of national unity.
Thank you. It's an interesting question. I think certainly from the pro-reform lobby that they would add kind of the way that the disengagement was carried out as kind of one of a series of kind of open wounds and gripes of the Israeli right that felt that this was overall. By the way, interestingly, just after the disengagement, one of the interventions of the Supreme Court was to go against the government in terms of their compensation package and actually insist that the compensation package be more generous than the government allowed, to basically include, the government allocated compensation per family, and the court ruled that not just the parents were liable for the trauma suffered, but also every child, every individual, even under the 18, was also liable for some compensation. So there's an interesting twist there, that although the pro-reformers kind of cite it as kind of an illegal law, that actually the Supreme Court came to the defense in the end. So I think there is something to it, but I think it's also compounded. I mean, I think all three legs of this current Israeli government, the hard right may have the issues of disengagement. The Haredim have a big issue with the High Court constantly overruling issues about equality of service in the military, and obviously that's also the next stage, which according to the coalition agreement, the ultra-Orthodox are very keen to advance. And I think other laws passed 2 or 3 years ago that the government cancelled out, what they called I'm forgetting the word now, but basically the legalization of all the outposts was also the regulation law that was also something that was outlawed by the High Court. So the overreach of the High Court and kind of going against a right-wing agenda is kind of a common theme, of which the disengagement and Gush Katif evacuations was a significant part, but just one of several gripes that they have.
Thank you. Stav, and then Keith Appleby.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry, I think I was on mute. Thank you very much, Richard, for the presentation. And I think, following up on what you said earlier, it's more of a comment than a question, really. But you're asking why an issue that is so peripheral has come to the fore. And I think, Israel's Justice Minister Yariv Levin has been quite clear on this since, maybe a decade ago, when he was saying that actually the reason that he wants to change the legal system is in order to enable an annexation of the West Bank, right? And the other day when he was in the Knesset listing a number of judicial decisions that had been made in Israel that he wanted to be able to carry out if this law were now passed, all related to the occupation or to people who had, expressed opinions against the occupation and then been censored by the state. So that's just a comment on that. But again, thank you so much for your comment. And especially, I think, about what you were saying about the importance, as an Israeli, I think what you were saying about the diaspora coming and helping us out of a sense of love and concern has been really meaningful. So thanks for that.
Thank you. People can be concise. We'll get some more questions in. Thank you. So Keith Appleby and then Mervyn Smith.
Hello, good morning. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I'm not an expert on this, but I read somewhere that over the past few years, the Israeli courts have been taking more and more powers to themselves. And this is a sort of what the government wants to do, is a sort of correction back to where they were 20 odd years ago. And the other thing I was going to say is that other governments have done very unpopular things, as you say, with the Gush Katif and all the rest of it, and we haven't had protests like this. And the last thing I want to say is my son is still turning up to Millerwim. so he's not a refusenik. But what's your opinion on the courts having taken the powers over the last few years?
So yeah, I mean, it's one of the main arguments, talking points of the government, that since the 1990s, and they refer to to the judicial revolution led by Aaron Barak and kind of judicial activism, that's where they believe that the pendulum has swung far more to an activist court. Again, it's definitely an argument by the government. How much it's valid, and again, how much there's more. If we're closer look of it, I think the High Court has overruled 20 laws, I think, in all of Israel's history. So it's to keep it in proportion. It's not. It's the other side would argue the other way, that there hasn't been that significant activism at all. And what I think is important, I think, to quote Ron Dermer, the minister and consigliere of the Prime Minister, is that any reforms, he was arguing this before the government was formed, should be done with a scalpel and not a sledgehammer. And so just if you kind of believe that change, you can't, as Levin would like to do, swing it back the other way completely and kind of take full power. That the essence of the checks and balances are still a very important feature of the system.
Thank you. Mervyn Smith. I'm really sorry, I did say before, unfortunately, we're not going to finish all the questions, so apologies to anyone that's not finished. You'll come on the President's statement if you want to. Mervyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard, for the excellent presentation. As a so-called senior citizen, I remember I was in Israel when Menachem Begin became Prime Minister. And at that time, they were saying there'll be guns on the streets, etc. And things changed, and he grew up to be an excellent Prime Minister. What sadly happened is that the present Prime Minister in Israel has become much weaker and much more inefficient, sadly, going on to the Haredi side. What are your views on that?
I mean, very briefly, lots of kind of members of the opposition are very proudly quoting Menachem Begin and how he stood up for a vibrant and independent Supreme Court. And in fact, there are lots of very interesting speakers who now have joined the protest campaign who are former Likudniks and kind of people that would kind of identify as kind of authentic Jabotinskyite right wing, that would argue exactly that this current Likud has been taken over by the radicals with a very heavy Haredi influence against the kind of the traditional core values of the Likud, which is Israel's liberal party.
Thank you. Ruth Hart and Jeremy Habadi. And I hope you can give us an extra 5 minutes, Richard. That would be really appreciated. You're very popular. Jeremy.
Richard, in your opinion, is the root problem the lack of a constitution or the lack of a first-past the post electoral system?
Well, I mean, I may be slightly controversial and say that I would defend Israel's current electoral system. The way I just kind of perceive it, it's a balance between representation and governability. And where we fall down clearly on governability, the representation is really important. With such a kind of a varied mosaic of Israeli society, the current system allows every sector of society. I mean, just look at the narrow sector of the Arab population have 3 different parties representing their interests: communist, Islamist, and pan-Arabists, and that allows kind of everyone to come into the tent. And I would argue better that way in such a divided society that gives representation, as opposed to having to seek extra parliamentary routes, which would also cause friction and more damage to society.
Thank you. If we're brief, we may even get the questions through. Thank you so much. Jeremy.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Marie. Richard, thank you very much for your insightful analysis. We've seen in recent weeks and months sort of rather gloating statements made by the leaders of Iran and Hezbollah, which suggests that in light of everything that's happening in Israel, the country's deterrent posture has been undermined, and the country is going to be, you know, destroyed and this sort of thing. Now, one can understand the kind of propaganda value that those statements have, but I wonder whether you think that, for example, Hezbollah and Iran are sort of looking at this as an opportunity now to seize the initiative and launch hostilities in the belief that, you know, Israel's defense is weaker than in the past, or is deterrence likely to hold as it has since 2006?
It's a great question, and we don't. I mean, this is the kind of, I would say, the top line issue that many Israelis in the security establishment are grappling with. I think two things slightly contradictory, but hopefully it makes sense. I think bottom line, there's an argument over whether Hezbollah is independent, representing kind of Lebanese interests, or if it is purely just a tool of the Iranians. If it's the latter, then the Iranians will definitely want the Hezbollah to hold their fire until if there was a time when Israel would attack nuclear sites in Iran, that the response would come from Hezbollah, and so they want to wait. However, at the same time, Iran is also using its influence both within Hezbollah, both within the West Bank, and even within Israeli Arab society as well as their entrenchment in Syria, to use all other their modus operandi of pushing their proxies to provoke and to test Israel. And that's what we've seen on the Lebanese border over the last month or so. I've counted at least half a dozen different incidents of border challenges, climbing up the fence, stealing cameras, a Lebanese MP walking over on Haldov, Sheba Farms area, where there's no fence, across the blue line in a provocative act. So they're definitely, and you've seen the tents that they've established in that same area, rocket fire onto the gates of the community of Raja. So they're testing Israel. We don't think, I mean, this is the assessment I hear from the military, that they're looking for a full-blown confrontation, but they may look for some form of limited skirmishes to test Israel. And of course, the risk of that is you can start those conflicts, but you never know how they end.
Thank you. We're making good time. So if everyone can be concise. Phil, Joe and Harriet, that's the order you were in. Thank you. Thank you for Richard. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. And thank you, Richard, for everything that you do. Always great work. One of the things that the board works really hard on, and I commend the HOs for the work they've done on this, is to try and keep the community together and to keep some sort of consensus. It's proving challenging, not because of the work of the HOs, but because of what's going on in Israel on this. And my fear is that it might get more difficult. There's talk of changes to rules around whether patrilineal and matrilineal descent and so on, that will have a huge impact, particularly on progressive communities, that might make things difficult. And I just wanted to get your sense of, crystal ball wise, what are the potential flashpoints, and if you had any advice to us as a board of deputies about how we try and hold together a community that's going to possibly become increasingly divided on these things, or very in pain about it, what you would suggest.
So I'll give a slightly more optimistic, maybe even cynical answer, that I think a lot of the potential bills which are being floated right now, for example, about the changes to the law of return, and a whole gamut of other proposals that were put in just before the Knesset closed. There's an element of Israel bluff here, which is kind of a common statement here. Basically, that there's a lot of things that are done or to be provocative deliberately, to create kind of mass concern, and also to raise the profile of these quite irrelevant backbencher MKs and give them some form of more prominence. I think one should be very careful about especially some of these private members' bills that do not have the backing of the government officially. They've been quite clear to make that distinction between kind of private initiatives and what is government policy. I would also wait again, here at BICON, we have a rule of thumb that when provisional bills are put forward, or even in the first reading of laws, doesn't reach necessarily the threshold in which we need to be writing on it, to bring it to the attention of our audience, because they often never get further past there. Of course, there's a risk in that they do suddenly become to the agenda. But I think we monitor these things very carefully. I'm sure you and other members of this call are as well. But it's about a calibration about when they reach critical mass and whether they're really going to be passed into law, or whether it's just kind of showboating by various backbench MKs.
Joe Millis, sorry, and Harriet, and that will be the last of the questions. Thank you so much, Richard. Joe.
Okay, hi. I was in a few demos while I was there, contrary to Foreign Office guidance. What about the 25% of the population who cannot identify with with the flag wavers, with the ex-military people who may not be refusing service? Don't they get a say? I mean, it looks as if these are just demos for the status quo. And what about the fact that it appears that Israel's brutality towards the Palestinians in the occupied territories appears now to be seeping over into Israel proper? Is it not time, do you think, when there is a separation movement, to start thinking about two states of Israel? One that is a modern democracy with all that entails, and one that is a kingdom of Benjamin the First of the house of Netanyahu?
So this issue came up actually quite prominently in the weekend Israeli media, and kind of to draw on Jewish history, the idea of a state of Judea and a state of Israel. I have to say, as a kind of consider myself a mainstream Zionist, I kind of heard those reports and reacted in quite shock and disgust at the idea that we would no longer remain part of a united, cohesive Jewish people. I think that's kind of a core part of the Zionism as I understand it. Your concerns are completely valid. There is real concern about kind of what starts in the West Bank and can filter through into Israeli society. And by the way, I'll make another comment that I wanted to answer to someone else's question earlier. Beyond the judicial reform, I think a large part of the US discussed, if we want to be as strong with some of Israeli government policy, is more related to Israeli policy over the West Bank, and they probably less care about the details of the judicial reform. But events in Hawara and kind of the settlement violence, which should be condemned by everyone, is really a mark of shame on full Israeli society, and they need to get to grips with that. And beyond kind of the overall kind of agenda of the right wing to expand settlements and to look to kind of creeping annexation as well, are amongst other fears and concerns.
Thank you very much. Last question, Harriet.
Hi, thank you so much, Richard, and thank you particularly for your comments just now. But I wanted to go back. You sort of responded with Phil's question, but you made the point earlier that the reasonableness legislation is really sort of was seen as an easy entree. And are we not right to fear that this is the tip of the iceberg? I know you've sort of responded to this already, but I think that is the concern of many in Israel and here.
So absolutely, that is completely the legitimate concern that this is the start. This is the start of an overall reform. I would say the good news is twofold. First of all, we've got some form of a respite now that the Knesset is on recess until after the Chagim, until mid-October, and the Prime Minister has also committed that there'll be nothing more until November. We have the summer months now to try and see if through President Herzog or through other machinations, they can start to kind of to work on some form of consensus. And I think there is some form of goodwill, as I said, between some parts of the Likud that understand that their agenda has been hijacked, and that first of all, for self-preservation, that this is potentially going to be disastrous for the Likud in the long run. So therefore, they need to build the necessity to understand to build consensus is there, and we have the time now, hopefully, for them to move forward. However, the risk is certainly still palpable, and the kind of the challenge for the protest movement is how do you keep up when even in a lull, how do you keep up the protest and the intensity of their objections to make sure that this government isn't continued to be hijacked by Levin and the hard rights agenda, and that there's some form of compromise does form. I have to say, broadly speaking, I'm a positive by default, and I remain optimistic that they can find some consensus here. But it's clearly it's a huge challenge, and it's no for sure not guaranteed.
Thank you, Richard. Can I say on behalf of everybody, we are really grateful giving up your time on a Sunday morning. You've answered so many questions, and we can see the diverse views of all different people here, and you've really responded very well. You're getting a clap. Thank you very much. And as always, I'm afraid we can never please everyone, but I think it's important when people have a chance to ask questions that we do try and prioritize people that ask less questions, so that we encourage more people to be involved. And thank you. You've been amazing. You're very welcome to stay with us for the rest of our meeting, or to become a deputy even, Richard. You've been so well received. Thank you very, very much. You're very welcome to stay.
I'll drop off, but thank you for your time, and thank you for engaging with this issue with such concern. It's kind of as I said, with my Israeli citizenship hat on, it's really appreciated that so many of you care so deeply and kind of don't lose faith and stick with it. And I commend your leadership and Michael's as well on these issues to kind of to act in such the vanguard of the community. So Chazak Be'emat, and good luck to you all.
Thank you. That's very, very good, very, very good of him. So thank you very much, Richard. Can we go back to business? I'm sorry, I'm just putting myself on gallery. Thank you. Can I just remind everybody when they speak, can you please give your name and your constituency? It makes the doing the meeting minutes much easier. Just still trying to admit people there. Can we go back to some housekeeping? Approval of the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of June. Thank you. I shall take them as approved. Let's come back onto the president's. Oh, sorry, I can see a digital hand. Robert Stone.
I have sent. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, I have sent an amendment in. I hope it will be accepted, that my raising the issue of the liability of deputies, my main reason for raising it was that it was an example of the need to improve governance of the board, but that was omitted. I hope that sentence I've sent to Sarah will be included.
I've been on holiday for 2 weeks on the seas, so I've had a chance just very briefly to thank you to look at that, and I'm told that the sentence that you wrote, they listened to it on the live streaming, wasn't actually what you said, but I'm sure that you can work out something acceptable between you. But the sentence you gave, I'm told, wasn't what was said. So perhaps you can review that and take it offline if that's all right. But I'm sure that can be resolved. Thank you. Coming back to the president's statement, let's do some good mazel tovs. I think mazel tovs are always good. So Lawrence Julius on the marriage of his son Adam to Naomi, and on the marriage of his daughter Jenna to Tim, a double mazel tov. That's wonderful. Penina Serrano on the bat mitzvah of Antoinette. Eleanor Lind on her election as a bencher at Gray's Inn. Lewis Osborne on his golden wedding anniversary, and to Anthony Adler on the birth of his beautiful daughter, Elsie Dorothy Adler. That's fantastic news. And I'm afraid condolences to a very long-standing deputy, a very, very dear friend of our community, Sidney Assur of Kingston Synagogue, on the loss of his wife, Elaine. And we wish you, Sidney, long life. Coming back to the president's statement, we thought it was important to ask someone to come this morning, and I think Richard did a very good job, so that we can really speak and have a chance to listen to an expert on what's going on in Israel. But there's many different thoughts and views. I really do understand that, and also the concern following the Israeli government's proposals to overhaul the judiciary last week, and the first part of that being approved. And we want to try and stay together as a community, and the Board of Deputies therefore issued a joint statement with the Jewish Leadership Council, which we thought was appropriate in the circumstances. I'll just read it quickly to you in case any of you missed it. Both the Board of Deputies and the JLC have been supportive of the efforts by President Herzog to find a compromise between supporters and opponents of proposed judicial reforms, and we are deeply disappointed that at this stage efforts have failed. Now that the first law has passed, we plead with Israeli leaders to return urgently to dialogue and to prevent the deepening of a constitutional crisis, which will do tremendous damage to the very fabric of Israeli society, its regional security and global status. A Jewish democratic state remains the greatest achievement of the Jewish people in modern times, and its preservation and development should be a priority of Jews worldwide. I think that probably sums up how most of us, I hope, feel, and that we are all praying for dialogue and are coming together so that these issues can be resolved. And I know how concerned we all are for what might happen. Going back, before I went away, we had an amazing event in Bevis Marks with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welbury. It was a landmark event where we had about 300 people from the Jewish communities around the UK for an interview with the eminent worldwide novelist and historian Simon Sebag Montefiore. And that was widely written up in the papers afterwards, and very important to note on anti-Semitism, with the church's history of anti-Semitism. He said that it had been, unquestionably, had been a disgusting, shameful and horrendous history with the Jewish people in the Middle Ages. And he said a lot more, and very importantly, he commended His Majesty King Charles III for his commitment to being a monarch for all faiths and none. And it really was an honour to have this event. I know it was greatly enjoyed by all of you that were there and people who've watched it online. So we want to thank everybody. I would like to say I am very pleased that finally the Roald Dahl Museum have done something about Roald Dahl's anti-Semitism at the museum. There is now a plaque, and I think that that's important to see what happens in the future. There's more work to do, and we look forward to this in the future. The BBC, there was a very serious incident and widespread anger across the community, where there was an interview with a former Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, where the presenter said that Israeli forces are happy to kill children. I wrote immediately to Tim Davie, and he responded incredibly quickly, and there was a swift apology from the BBC, and I think that should be appreciated. We've widely spoken about the situation with The Guardian. We've had our second meeting also, but meanwhile, there was also another unfortunate article which is referred to in the President's statement on July 18th, which I'm sure Amanda will probably address in her statement. So I'm happy to take any questions. I'm happy for people to carry on talking about Israel, whatever deputies would like to do. Richard Sassoon, and then Doris Schmetterling. And just to tell you the timeline, we're going to be on the President's statement until just after, I'll be told that it will be probably at 12:30, so that there's time for the HOs to actually give their presentations. So if people have still got questions at that time, we'll go on to the HO's presentations, and if there's time, we'll come back to the President's statement. Richard
Sassoon, S&P Sephardi Community. It's with questions with regard to The Guardian. You said that there was a second incident, but also this week there was an article by the cartoonist who drew the cartoon with an anti-Semitic caricature of the director of the BBC, where he was basically admitting his anti-Semitism and what he had learned since he had drawn that cartoon. Have you seen that article? Have you commented on it? And what's your position on it?
When we had our second meeting with The Guardian, we were told that there would be an article. We have made a comment on it. It's on the board's social media. Look, we think it is an apology. It's thoughtful. I think that's what we said on social media. It had been a very thoughtful apology. I think it's an important step by the Guardian to recognise what's happened. They did have, as I say, two meetings with Ali. So of course it's not acceptable that it happened, but I think it's a step in the right direction, and we'll have to hope that there's no further repetition. And it was quite an article, I think, for somebody to write about what they had done for the world to see. That's my view on it, but thank you. Doris Schmetterling.
Thank you. Doris Schmetterling, New West End Synagogue, Bayswater, something I forgot to say earlier. Thank you. I would just want to take your invitation to comment when on the previous session, but you said if you have anything to say or ask, we could do it now in your time. It's unfortunate Richard Prater isn't there now, but I wanted to respond to his comment about the electoral system that somebody else asked. And I don't agree with him at all. I think there's a major failure in the electoral system in Israel because there's a single constituency electing on a proportional representation, on proportional votes. This might have worked when Israel had a population of 500,000 or 1 million, but today it obviously doesn't work because there's no MP who was responsible to a constituency. There's no such thing that we have. So my opinion is, my suggestion is, and I'd be delighted to hear comments from anybody in the room or online, is that Israel should adopt a system, because they won't go to first past the post, which has its own problems anyway, which I think is past its prime, is what is done in the GLA, the London Assembly, a form of it, or a form of what the German Parliament does. And in short, its approximate is that half the Parliament is elected by first past the post from specific constituencies, and the rest of the chamber is made up according to the percentage of votes received. Thank you.
Thank you. With apologies to other deputies, because Dory, I'm sorry that I realised you have spoken before, because I wouldn't have called you, and it's not fair. There's a number of people with hands up. I've got to give priority to people that haven't spoken before, so apologies. Annabelle.
Thank you. I'm deputy for Aleph, one of them. I was just wondering, going back to Richard's presentation in Israel, whether everyone has concerns for women in Israel, especially after the women of the war had their prayer books all torn up by an incitement mob of far-right people, far-right representatives, and also the non-recognition of reformed marriages and the right of return. Just wanted to emphasize this, and what do you think?
Thank you. I think you're right to emphasize it, and these are very much shared concerns of communities worldwide. We can't say anything else. You've hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. They're key in a lot of people's minds, and these are issues that we can only hope that we will be resolved. And violence to women or to anyone else is unacceptable on any basis, and the violence that we've seen is certainly not acceptable. So you're right to raise that as well. Thank you. Jane, can you give your surname, please? I'm trying to go for people that don't often speak first, and your constituency, and then Noah. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Jane Power. I'm a new deputy from Westminster, one of two, and I've never spoken before. So I'd like to go back to your comments, Marie, and I know you've mentioned this in your notes before on the King's comments of being monarch to all and being inclusive in the coronation, and now what the Archbishop said. And I want to know if we have a very specific program to leverage this kind of support that we're getting. I know you mentioned the plaque, but often we have to respond defensively against outright acts of anti-Semitism, but this could be more a proactive approach to preventing anti-Semitism, maybe the more subtle kind later on.
Big part of the job of the president and all the HOs is to find friends for the Jewish community. We have an excellent relationship with Lambeth Palace. We have a task force. These are not things that have just suddenly appeared. Indeed, the relationship with the royal family. I've also seen the Pope twice in the last year. All of these things make a difference, and behind the scenes there are lots of relationships where, just as you say, we're not always on the defensive. We also have to have allies, and we have to be ambassadors. So thank you for pointing that out. That's absolutely absolutely correct. And all of our faith-based work, our interfaith relations also are extremely important to try and forge relationships where we can all work together, because minority communities should all work together. Thank you. Noah.
Hi, Noah Katz, they, them, UGS deputy. I didn't see anything in the paperwork about the news from the ADL this week about this new global partnership. I wonder if you could touch a bit more on that, Marie.
Yes, we have, to my knowledge, and forgive me, as I say, I have actually taken a holiday. We had, I understand, issued a statement. We have also spoken quite a few times over the last few months that we are producing a digital resource to go into schools in relation to Judaism and preventing anti-Semitism. And we're one of, I think, 7 countries that are working together to try and do what we can worldwide on a partnership basis with the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, which are a first-class organisation. So I think that's a very fair question. I think I'll ask Michael Uyghur afterwards to get something out to deputies during the week. But I think I saw that there was a statement about it. But it's a very good organisation, and it's very important that we work with our sister communities around the world to give each other the support that we need. Susan Pascoe.
Thank you very much, Marie. Susan Pascoe, Israel Community. I wanted to raise the issue of there's nothing in your statement about Just Stop Oil comparing the bosses of oil and gas companies to the architects of the Holocaust, and an activist drew a comparison with Adolf Eichmann. This seems something that the board should be involved in, should meet with them, state with them that they're alienating part of the community when they shouldn't be. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take that back. Now, I think I can see, thank you, Daniel Levy, you've got your hand up. I think you haven't spoken at a plenary before, is that right?
That's correct.
Over to you.
Thank you. Daniel J. Levy, under 35 observer for the Armed Forces Jewish Community. Would the President consider supporting the proposed under 35 assembly being run under the Chatham House rule to promote genuine open dialogue?
I think that's got to be a matter for people that are currently working to bring this about. I understand that there are meetings, and I think that's probably a good question for David Mendoza-Wolfson, who isn't here because he's on holiday. I don't want to really interfere with the democratic process about what's being discussed, but I will take that question away. It's a very fair and important question, so I will have some discussion behind the scenes about it, but I will consult with them what they're proposing at the moment, if that's all right. But thank you, thanks for that question. Flora, and then we'll do Lawrence, and Phil, you've spoken before, so I hope you don't mind if you're last. Flora Frank.
I'm trying to oh gosh, just a minute.
You want us to come back to you, Flora?
Yes, okay. Yes, I can't unmute.
You are unmuted.
Simon, can you... Oh, have I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, thank you very much. I want to thank Richard Pater for that amazing exposition. And I want to say something quickly, because this is not my question, that I'm also an Israeli citizen. I've been in Israel, and we have to applaud the way Israeli society demonstrate. That's all. They are a dogma. They are a wonderful example. The camaraderie, if I may put it in inverted commas, it's got, because we have to do something to diffuse the situation. My question to you is, I want to thank Michael Uyghur and Daniel Mendoza very, very much for trying so hard to organize this Israeli mission. And we deputies representing, and I'm British Amunah, I'm sorry, we deputies representing many diverse organizations have missed a very vital opportunity to be in situ, especially due to the current political situation, unrest with the judicial reform bills, etc., all the points that have been raised legitimately. Subsidies were available. I'd like to know how many people showed interest and why were we not offered a lower priced option? Can this mission still go ahead? I think it's vital. I've said it before. And why did we not show more interest? I mean, in a way, forgive me, deputies, but this is something crucial what's going on. We've got so much to say and we're sitting as armchair critics. We should be going there, speaking to the people. This is a crucial time in our history. And I hope Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Yisrael Chai indeed. Flora, you've said, I think that's very important. We don't have enough deputies. We did try to offer subsidies. If after this meeting and Flora's plea, more of you contact us, there may be something we can retrieve, even a cheaper hotel option. But I believe we're about 20 people short. Not many people, in truth, deputies signed up. And Flora's right. We shouldn't be armchair critics. We should go there. We should see it. I think it's really important. I'm really grateful that you said that, Flora. So every deputy, if you're listening and you think that you could come and support the mission, we'd be grateful to hear from you. But I need to try. I've got to finish at 12:40, so I'm going to go to Lawrence. And sorry, Phil, David has come in and he hasn't spoken. So Lawrence.
Lawrence Julius Harif. Marie, first I would like to commend the board for taking issue with the BBC on the Bennett interview, and I hope on future times when BBC reporting has similar issues, the board will repeat this. And the other ask I have, with an election on the horizon, could I request the board dedicate a plenary to discussing the Jewish manifesto for deputies to express their views on key policies? I think that would be a very useful, beneficial plenary. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to leave that one to the board to actually have some discussion about, because I understand at the moment the staff are updating the policy and there will be discussions with stakeholders. I'm not sure if that's the best use of plenary meeting. I think there'll probably be focus groups and various times to actually talk about it rather than plenary. But I'm going to leave that to our Director of Public Affairs to come up with a recommendation as to how we do that. But I don't think a debate at plenary about the manifesto will mean that we can't do all of our other board business, but focus groups can be done in between. I'm sure there's a way of having extensive consultation, and also consultation as we usually do with our stakeholders. But good question, and I'll take that back to the team. Thank you. David, Safir.
Thank you, Madam President. Just two brief follow-up questions. The first is, you will remember, of course, that at Bevis Marks, the Archbishop spoke very movingly about his mother, Jane Williams, who was then gravely ill. I understand that she has now passed away, and I just wondered whether the board had expressed our condolences to the Archbishop. And the second question is simply this, that as the Royal Dahl Museum has now acknowledged his anti-Semitism, the plaque and so on, which has been erected, will the board still pursue, does the board intend to pursue Netflix still regarding its future productions and whether they were going to acknowledge his anti-Semitism? Thank you.
Firstly, of course, despite being on holiday, I did hear about the very sad passing of the Archbishop of Canterbury's mother, and I wrote a personal letter from myself and on behalf of the Board of Deputies. So the answer to that is, of course, we did so. The Royal Dahl Museum, it's quite good because Phil is coming straight after me. Phil, of course, wanted, when he was Director of Public Affairs, to make Netflix do a documentary. Is it enough? It's never enough, because they've made an awful lot of money. There's a lot of work still to do. But I think it's going to be difficult to get Netflix to agree to do a documentary. We've tried that one, but there's got to be other ways that we can highlight Roald Dahl's racism, and I think it is a good start in the museum. It's taken time. I don't think we can force a documentary to be made by Netflix. They're certainly aware of what we've got to say, and they will have cooperated, I'm sure, behind the scenes with the museum to actually get to a place. But there's certainly other things that we can do, that we should be pursuing, because he mustn't just be glorified, and his anti-Semitism has certainly got to be remembered. And at that point, Phil.
Thank you very much indeed. Phil Rosenberg, Bronsbury Park Synagogue. I wanted to follow on from Lawrence's point on the Jewish Manifesto. It's one of the things I was proudest to have been involved in when I was as a staff member at the Board of Deputies. I think, Marie, you answered my question that I asked about this in terms of deputy consultation, and you said there would be a full process, and I think that's really welcome. We've had some unfair headlines in recent weeks in the Jewish media, and I think that the fact that we're consulting deputies on policy is a really strong answer to that. We did in the past put some of it through plenary, so I would suggest don't rule it out completely, but I suppose my question was, in the FNO we have a deputy engagement working group, and I'd love to talk to whoever's involved in that, to Dan Sugarman or whoever in the HO team is doing that, to work out how we maximally involve deputies in the discussion about how we craft the policy, because I think that is the way to answer the criticism that, you know, we don't have a mandate on these issues or whatever. We make sure that we have that. The manifesto we put to candidates in the upcoming elections has broad consensus, and that the positions that the board then takes are broadly in consensus with what deputies are thinking. So that's an offer, and President, you know, we're very happy to help with that. And, you know, the question is, can we involve the deputy engagement working group?
Well, we're going to do exactly the same process that you yourself as Director of Public Affairs did to make sure that there's consultation with the manifesto. Fear not, it's going to be exactly the same as you did, and I'm sure that Daniel and the rest of the Public Affairs team are going to work very hard to put a programme together. And Amanda is also going to be involved in this, and there is going to be a lot of discussion, and I think this is going to be led by the Public Affairs team and also Amanda Bowman in her role, and I'm sure that she'll be mentioning this shortly. But of course the board has a democratic mandate, as you've always said, and we know that we've existed since 1760, and there has to be a reason why an organisation is still thriving after all of that time. So I think it's very important that we do have those discussions, and I will take advice from the professional team and other HOs as to how that consultation will take place. Thank you. Can we move on, please, to the division report? And David Mendoza-Wolfson is on holiday, and I want to thank Jonathan Coles. He's going to be presenting the report, and I will hand over to you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. So I'll just start talking about, I'm not going to repeat the whole report, but you can see that it's divided into sections. One of the main sections is diplomatic engagement. And as Marie had commented in the last segment, a lot of what the board doesn't just happen out of the blue. It's on the basis of years of meeting with people, building the relationships, doing the groundwork. And so a lot of what David and our other David, I should give credit to David Robinson, the new staff support for our division, who's doing a wonderful job. They hold a lot of meetings, and when there's a change of an ambassador, et cetera, they go and meet and make sure they understand areas for collaborations, areas for potential education. And in our case, probably most importantly, where we can hit our mission of trying to bridge relationships between communities. And so the main sort of flagship project for our division in the last few months has been with the German mission to try to create a twinning activity. And what we've discovered as we've sort of gone into it, and it's taken a little bit of time because there's some funding on the German government side that involves a bit of bureaucracy. But we found numerous ways where we can bridge our communities through this twinning concept. And it's not just saying, announcing a twinning ship. It's a wide range of activities, either involving youth groups, involving cantors, involving, a lot of it involves travel, which would potentially involve the costs that we're discussing, et cetera, et cetera. So we expect to be able to announce relatively soon, certainly in the next few months, what exactly the contours of that twinning relationship with the German Jewish communities will be. Another area, I mean, obviously we try to work with all our sister communities and partner organizations. There's a special focus also on the Commonwealth groups. And there was a meeting recently with representatives from Bermuda's community. And probably the third area would be just dealing with the Foreign Office in the UK and making sure that areas of importance are being addressed. And then finally, I just would like, before I open it to questions, I would just like to make a comment on Flora's comment about the Israel mission that obviously our division was involved in. Starting just with the congratulations to David and Michael for the work that they put in. Whether it actually happens or not, I think it's important that there should be a recognition. I did a bit of Googling of all the people who we were going to meet with, and frankly, it was overwhelmingly impressive and interesting that this agenda could be put together. And from a personal standpoint, I had signed up, but when I saw that the numbers were short, I thought, well, maybe I can get my wife or my son to go, and that way maybe we can get the numbers and keep this great mission. But then upon reflection and talking to David, I understood that really the value of this is the deputies themselves go. And we're the ones who are the deputies, we're the representatives. And the idea of just trying to make up the numbers to save a project so the project doesn't become aborted is really pointless. And so I would echo what Flora said, that not just listen to Flora or to me, but go and take a look at what Michael and David have proposed and think about it. And maybe there is a need to have some communication. And if it needs to be reorganized in a different direction, we can look into that. I mean, obviously time is now becoming an issue because I don't think there were that many slots available besides the December slot. But I would urge deputies to just give it another read. Obviously I'm available, David's available, Michael's available, whoever. And if there is a way to rejig this, let's do it, but let's do it the right way with deputy involvement and participation, and not just pumping up the numbers to not have a project that doesn't go forward. So with that, I'll open it up to questions and do the best I can. And obviously with the caveat, as I've stated and Marie has stated, that it's more appropriate for Israel policy and board statements to go through Marie and Michael and the executive rather than our division, because we've got some great work going on, like the twinning project I mentioned. But I also have to state that we essentially lost 2 divisional meetings debating Israel resolutions, which had to be done, constitutionally corresponded to our division. But it did throw us back a little bit in some of the progress we were hoping to make with some of these other projects.
Thank you. I think you've got Brian Bloom wants to ask you a question.
Yes, I applaud the work of your division on the diplomatic engagement field. As everyone's probably aware, I'm a Litvak, and I see that you're actually the Davids. I'm aware of my concerns and the concerns of Litvaks internationally, of the continued denial by the Lithuanian government on their complicity in the murder of the Jews, 97.5% of the Jews in Lithuania in the Holocaust. I'd very much like to know what was spoken about at the Lithuanian meeting, MC meeting, when the 2 Davids met the ambassador to Lithuania.
Okay, well, I was not at that meeting. I also have a very personal interest in this because my family is of Lithuanian descent, although pre-Holocaust coming to America. The division, this is my second triennial on the division, has had great relationships and many meetings with the various Litvak people, and of course being invited for Litvak Day, et cetera, et cetera. And so unless David Robinson or someone would like to, who was actually at the meeting, wants to take that up, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. But I will say also that some of the feedback we get at our division meetings is that there's not enough minutes circulated about some of these meetings. People want to know in advance. Perhaps maybe some of the meetings are appropriate for more than just the two Davids to attend. And so we've taken that advice on board. And I think particularly in this example where the representatives really want to hear from us from that embassy, I think we can look to the future to perhaps have a much broader meeting, like we recently did with at the Portuguese embassy, where the circumstances allowed us to have more attendees at the meeting than just the two Davids. So I'm definitely going to bring that back to David Mendoza Wolfson, that perhaps given our great relationships with the Lithuania embassy, that we could perhaps look to broadening out a dialogue and make it maybe even a little bit more substantive and not just celebratory.
Thank you. Thank you. We are going to have to run to if George White's questions very, very quick, because the other HOs need to have time for their reports. This must be a quick, concise question. Thank you.
Building on the previous comments, I read every week that various honorary officers and others keep on going to meetings with all sorts of people. Very rarely do we actually find out what happened at that meeting or what went on and what came out of the meeting. And as a general point to all the HOs and yourself, Marie, it would be nice is that when you tell us there has been a meeting, that we actually, somebody says what actually happened, or do we need to know about it and give us some information about the meetings. I've asked this question several times before and seems to fall on deaf ears. In other words, what happened? But the previous question, it'd be nice if somebody wrote up to say, we went to see this embassy and this is what came out of it.
Absolutely. As I say, in both triennials I've been serving, that point has been put up as one of the top points. Now, part of it is the nature of the beast, to not, have such a public record, but there are certain things, starting with the agenda, which I think could be, and certainly if we could try to figure out technologically the best way to make it informative yet continue to be private. The nature of a lot of these conversations are private, particularly with a lot of the sensitivities in a lot of the Central and Eastern European countries. But yeah, I take that on board, and we will come up with some way to improve this going forward, because I think it has been a concern raised numerous times.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well put. And of course, it's not always possible to divulge the contents of meetings, or people won't necessarily see us. That's the issue, but there is a balance. But well said. Thank you so much for your report. Can I come on, please, to Amanda Bowman and ask you to present your report, please?
Good afternoon, deputies. You've all seen my report, and Marie has mentioned a couple of things that she's asked me to pick up from her report that I'm happy to pick up before I talk to some of the other issues that took place directly in the division. So we talked about an article in The Guardian on July the 18th that included a graphic showing the 15 countries where women can face sanction if they leave home without a male guardian's permission. We very quickly responded to that, and as a result of our representations, the paper took the graphic away completely and acknowledged that it lacked adequate context. Annabelle, this picks up on the point that you made earlier and that Marie strongly agreed with about the fact that we need to be concerned and alert to the issues of how Israel's reporting about everything, but in particular, in this case, we were successful in tackling this issue of how they were, what they were saying about how Israel treats its women. Second issue that I just want to pick up on is the issue around the manifesto development. The Public Affairs team have put together a timeline that looks at how we can develop it. It includes several areas for deputy engagement. There's the more input that I think that we can provide for deputies to input both at the beginning, early in the process, to make sure that we're covering everything that deputies feel as most important as we move forward, and then both via all the divisions, because obviously there are things in our manifesto development that affect across the divisions, and so there'll be consultation across divisions, and then more open consultation and as Marie suggests, focus groups, but there'll be open meetings for deputies along the way before you would see a final draft and have the opportunity to respond to the words as well as the ideas within it. So look out for that, deputies. I just want to talk about a few other things. There was a really productive meeting of the Metropolitan Police Jewish Community Forum that took place this past week. Had good attendance from across the board, from the Communities and Education Division, from London Jewish Forum, from several Board of Deputies members, as well as from Michael Uyghur and myself, where they gave us a really strong update on their policy and protocols for policing demonstrations and rallies that has been updated as a result of the work that we've done through that forum. I also want to highlight the division meeting recently that we held, where we invited Lord Mann to come and join us to discuss his new report on anti-Semitism in higher education. We were also delighted to have the new UJS president join us, as well as to open up that meeting to the Communities and Education Division. So we did it across the two divisions. We're working at the moment on a couple of important consultations, including a law commission, providing evidence to a law commission review and consultation on burial and cremation laws. And then I just want to highlight a couple of other things. The first is that we had a very productive anti-Semitism in culture working group meeting this week. That working group's chaired by Pernina Serrano. Thank you, Pernina, for the work that you've been doing. And that we had a guest speaker. We had Luke Akehurst from We Believe in Israel come and talk to the group to share his experience of the work that he's done in terms of tackling anti-Israel rhetoric and anti-Semitism in culture over the last 10 or 15 years, which was very helpful to the group in terms of taking our plans forward. And just to make the point that our next division meeting is on the 14th of August, where we'll take reports from the anti-Semitism in sport, the anti-Semitism in culture, and the local government working group. So heads up to all of you there if you're either observers or part of those working groups, or you chairing those working groups. We've got a couple of weeks before those meetings. And now I want to open to questions. So I can see Paul Hart, you have a question.
Yes, hi Amanda. I do apologise, but my needle is still stuck in the same record groove. With regards to the meeting with the police and their 2-year plans for how the Met will deliver more trust, I'm still bringing up the problems that we're having in Hackney, Clacton and Stamford Hill with perpetual anti-Semitic attack, lack of policing. And I did explain last time when I tried to send in the freedom of information to the, no, not CST,
CPS.
Sorry, my brain's died, and they couldn't give me an answer back because it would cost too much money. Freedom of information, thank you. I'm thoroughly disgusted with that. So was it mentioned at all at the meeting with the police?
No, because I think you put your freedom of information request into the CPS, and so I'm having conversations separately about, Paul. In terms of the meeting with Metropolitan Police, you may be aware, and if you're not, I can send you information as it starts coming through, that on a borough by borough basis, the Metropolitan Police are consulting on the next steps of the review and the work that they're doing to rebuild trust and so on. There are opportunities for deputies to participate in those sessions. You just, I think it's pretty much on a first come first served basis. So, you know, depending on where you're looking, you don't have to. I mean, obviously, it's stronger if you're attending in the borough where you live, but those meetings are being advertised locally, and you should participate if you can, and you can bring up these points directly with the police. Hi, and I can see that you've got your hand up.
Hi, I was just wondering if the division had discussed the new any work related to the new area that's being put up in Golders Green and the planning application process with Barnet Council, and if they had interacted with that.
So no, that hasn't been discussed at our division. It may well have been picked up by the Communities and Education division, and I'll pass that on to Edwin to cover when he makes his report. But thank you for asking.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you for your report. Could I now ask, please, Michael Ziff to present his report for the Finance and Organisation division? Thank you. I don't think we can hear you, Michael.
I've unmuted now. There we go. I've unmuted. Sorry about that. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon now. I have written a fairly extensive report, and I think there's 2 or 3 points that I'd just like to highlight from the report where people have either dropped me notes or I've seen questions asked. So I first want to just say that having had 6 months looking and working with the team, our concern at this moment in time is to make sure that we finish the year with a balanced budget. It's what I said at the very beginning, and it's important that we achieve that figure. There are many things that can happen, as all of you realize in life, that can knock us off for one reason or another. And whilst I believe that we are generally in a fairly safe place, and I don't want anybody to get overexerted by what I've said in the report, there are things that are happening which do concern me. So first and foremost, just where it has raised the question of WJC, what has happened there is that this was not a grant that we automatically should expect every year. They've been phenomenally supportive to us over the years, and they themselves are going through a review as to what they are considering priorities, particularly as their monies come from an individual to their organisation. So we should be thankful for what we've received. We should be thankful that we're going to receive something this year, but we need to make sure that we are in control of our own destiny in managing the situation. And to that end, we need to make sure that we are, one, collecting our contributions from the synagogues, and that's important that we have relationships with the synagogues and the organisations and charities that are members of the Board of Deputies. And to me, it's vital that we get out there and talk to the synagogues, and I've had a small opportunity to talk to a number of them, particularly as many of you know, saying Kaddish and have this idea of wanting to try and say Kaddish in 200 different places. And I've been phenomenally welcomed by a number of synagogues that I've been to. So I'm still around to want to continue that plan. As far as the general costs are concerned, we've said here that we want to make sure that we do get to as close to break even as possible. We are reviewing the situation very carefully, and we're making sure that we run an organization that falls within the numbers that we can afford to operate in. And therefore, that's what the plan is. But as I say, I believe we are in a relatively safe place, but let's not get tripped up by having anything that's a concern and a worry. I can say that Michael and I have started to do some fundraising. We've had limited success. Michael probably a bit more success than I have, but he's very professional at his fundraising. It's a plan that we will continue to do. And hopefully as the year goes on, we will, and we have got more and more appointments to see people and talk to people and develop the fundraising strategy, which is relatively new, together with a legacy strategy that we're also going to put into place. So I think all of these things are strategies which will help the organization and to ensure its safety. So I think that gives you a sort of overall view. Anybody wants to talk to me at any time, I'm available on a number of points. As far as the rest is concerned, I've set it out in the report. Anybody got any questions, I'll be delighted to answer them or field them to other people. So I'm around here, and if you want to write to me at any time or call me, I'm available to chat numbers through with you.
Thank you. I think you did all the speaking. No one seems to have any questions. And can I just say, for fundraising, I know that Michael has a huge amount of expertise, and Michael and I have also been along to see a number of people, and I'm pleased to say that we have had some very good grants as a result of some of those meetings, and I know that Michael's got more in the diary, so we are having some success, which is very important, as you said.
He's got one tomorrow at 10:30. I know that. Well, we've got one tomorrow at 10:30.
No pressure on the person at 10:30. Right, thank you very much. Could we ask, please, Edwin, you're going to present your report for the Community and Education Division. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Madam President. I'm particularly proud this afternoon to present both the report, which is in front of you, full and to the capacity, and we had to reduce it again to 2 pages, and also proud of the number of people and the impressive bios and profiles that are standing for election. It is unbelievable that only 10 months left, and yet we have 7 people who have put their names forward to join our division, and I can assure you, not only the winners, but there are no winners and losers here. We are all contributors, and there is a place for each one of you. And we can't wait to have the election set up, because we're reshuffling to make sure that everyone has got a working group, a target. We will come back in the September with a new look of our report, with new initiatives and motives, and I can feel that we will be actually fulfilling our plans, our strategic plans, on time and on budget. The second thing I would like to mention is what Michael Ziff mentioned, the sort of a little bit of dipping in the communal contribution. So I spoke with on Al Shabbat at Woodside Park, and I mentioned a few things that people were not aware of, and I want each of you deputies to do the same with your synagogues. And we at the HOs are all 5 of us are here to, if you want us to come in weekdays, Shabbat, to push that and to actually inform people what are we doing. I mean, I titled the talk is, what has the board ever done to us? And when I mentioned things like Pikuach, we are so proud to have something which is sort of the equivalent of Jewish Ofsted, independent, ethical, bringing a new league to the Jewish education in our schools. And I mentioned just one statistic, that what it cost us to fund Pikuach needs 2,350 people to push their communal levy contribution of £30 in order for us to achieve that alone. And I want to tell you what was most pleasing for me was at the end of my talk, people came in, 2 people came in, and I don't know them, but they said, you know, each said, I have crossed out the voluntary contribution, but I now want to know, where do I send the check? And I think that would be something that you will find out once you tell people what it costs to run this and how and what we're doing it. Things like SACRE, things like all these things are the heritage, and I'm very, very proud today. 3 things: the number of people who stood for election, the report, the full report, and the fact that actually if people have listened to us, and I hope that now not only will we recover the dip in the communal contribution, but we'll exceed it. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer.
No questions? Okay, looks as if we might be finishing early.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madam President.
No, thank you. Well, I'd like to thank, oh, here we go. Chaim.
Yeah.
Chaim's got a question for you. Thank you.
My earlier question on the ERIV, I asked it to the wrong division head. I don't know if you heard it, but I wanted to know, have the division done anything in relation to the new Golders Green ERIV situation?
Could you just elaborate the question? Because we have not discussed it, but it didn't come to our notice that there was something for us to do. And it would be lovely to actually connect with you privately, but just elaborate it for the deputies.
Sure. So the current ERIV in Hendon and Golders Green crosses over a road that, depending on who you are, on which rabbi you ask, disqualifies the entire ERIV. So there is currently a plan that is going through the various planning committees and stages of Barnet Council to introduce a new ERIV that goes from the area just south of the North Circular and then covers Golders Green to create an additional ERIV that is acceptable to more Jews who live in the ERIV to be able to carry on Shabbat.
I'll pick it up with you after the meeting. I'm just not sure what contribution you want us to do. I see more questions, Madam President.
Please take the questions.
Joe Mills.
Yeah, hi. On the table.
Can you? Yeah, you're unmuted now. Can you repeat?
Sorry. Yeah, since you put the communal contribution on the table, would it not be, I mean, this is an issue for my synagogue, would it not be right, therefore, that if we are going to pay, we have a say in policy? Because up till now, we get policy announcements that we don't, we're not told about. I understand that you can't, discuss everything with it, on an emailing, but a policy framework on so many issues that we've never discussed. And that's a problem for me. My synagogue, I can't sell the communal contribution to my synagogue for that reason and for other reasons, but that's something else. Thank you.
I actually don't agree with you, Joe, at all. I think we were elected in divisions and in honorary officers and president in order to fulfill our job as best as we can by feeling the senses of things, by hearing every single deputy connecting with us all the time. It's not just policies in plenaries. And the open nature, the way that the president take absolutely any criticism and anything, and anyone who wanted to speak. Not one person today was missed, and that is your part of influencing the policy. But to actually suggest that if we want to make a comment on an issue, that we need to hold a referendum or a plenary, it's just unworkable. And as much as it sounds wonderful and democratic, I think what we do here by allowing everyone to comment on anything without any questions to the president things is just democracy as best as I've ever seen it in any Jewish organization anywhere in the world. Jeremy.
Am I unmuted? Yes, thank you. Jeremy Michelson, Manchester Great New and Central Synagogue. Just a point of information, Edwin, this came too late for the report. I represent the community on Blackburn Sacre, and last Tuesday, as part of the augmentation of the locally agreed syllabus in Blackburn, they filmed me for filming took about an hour and a half, but in fact it was for about 5 minutes on talking about Judaism and particularly the history of the community and what Judaism means to me. Obviously, in 5 minutes, you had to be very careful and very specific in what you said, but it's all part of the increasingly good stuff that's going online from a number of different organizations in Leeds, in Oldham, and soon in Blackburn, to really illustrate what Judaism is about. And of course, that really is part of the fight against anti-Semitism. It's the positive way of doing it, to try and break down the ignorance and incomprehension that leads to racism. So I just thought I'd mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for all your contributions over the last, I don't know how many triennials. Adrian Cohen. Unmute, yeah. Adrian.
Thank you, Edwin. Just very quickly, just picking up on Chaim Stanton's comment about the ARUV. I sit on the Highgate Muswell Hill ARUV Trust. We've been working on an ARUV which will cover an area contiguous to the Barnet ARUV and the Camden ARUV. And completion of that ARUV will mean that effectively the whole of Hampstead Heath is incorporated within the ARUVim, which will have an enormous effect on people visiting the Royal Free Hospital on Shabbat or Yom Tov. That's been a huge exercise because it involves getting permission both from Camden, Islington and Haringey councils. We've got 2 out of the 3 councils on side, and the third, Islington, which has been by far the slowest, is hopefully coming through in the next month or so. So that doesn't address the specific issues with the Barnet ARUV, which are long-standing, and I'm no expert on that. But hopefully, if that's resolved, it means that we've got effective ARUVim throughout a huge chunk of northwest London, which will be very beneficial for people, particularly those visiting the sick. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. William Badgins. Thank you, William.
Oh, am I unmuted? Okay.
Yes.
It's William Baginski, Association of Jewish Refugees. It's going back to the inclusivity survey, and I wondered if you had any sense of the reasons why so many of the constituencies didn't reply to the survey, and if not, are you going to take any steps to check that out?
Thank you very, very much. Yes, first of all, I actually was not unhappy about the number of responses we have. We are analyzing it. We continue to receive some, but we will be actually going on the offensive even, and actually contacting people who have not answered. Because what we want is not an answer to the questionnaire. What we want is for this process to carry on, for the deputies to connect with their boards and their synagogues, like I did, like many people who answered did, and say, right, guys, the board has now completed its work on the commission. It published its report. It published its recommendations. It implemented them. Now, what are we going to do over the next year to do so? And I'm actually carrying on the same thing to the heads of the representative councils in September. We've already alerted them that this is what we want, and we want each of them, each head, to actually get all his constituents in all over the country and says, right, guys, what are we going to do part of the implementation of the Commission on Diversity and Inclusion? And that's really, we want that to carry on a life of its own beyond what we're doing. And so we will be chasing those who have not answered. And I appeal to you again, for those who can still connect with their boards and say, what are we going to do in the coming year to implement what is recommended? Sheila, I was looking for you.
Thank you, Edwin. I'm
who's going to
here.
put me in place and going to tell me what have I missed in my.
You haven't missed anything, Edwin. Sheila Giewald, Cardiff United Synagogue. I just want to thank you for giving the mention to the Sacres in the report. Over 130 Jewish people are now on these Sacres. You know, at the beginning of the triennium, we had a list of about 30, and the amazing work we do. But let's not forget the jewel in our crown, the Jewish Living Experience exhibition. Joe, do what Jeffrey Norman did. Go to your community. Explain about the work of our outreach and how we're fighting anti-Semitism, going out there, helping to protect everybody in our community by dispelling the myths and misconceptions that Jeremy mentioned. You know, let us not forget the positive side of what we do, as well as looking for stuff that we need to defend ourselves against. So Edwin, thank you. Everybody, thank you for all the amazing work we do. And yeah, the exhibition's really taken off now. We've got dates booked going into the new year. And I'm not going to mention any names. You know who you are, who actually approach us, Anna and Dawn and myself and Sarah Radvan, thank you, to get the exhibition out there. Thank you again, Edwin, and it's good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you for completing what I missed, actually thanking the staff that have been absolutely heroic, all of them. And I want, so thanks for completing this. I will now take Phil Rosenberg for the third time as a lucky three. And Phil, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Edwin, and thanks for an excellent report. Phil Rosenberg, Bronsbury Park Synagogue. Two things quickly, just prompted by some of the things people have said. On Erevs, I used to be on the planning committee in Camden and helped shepherd through the Erev proposals there. So if I can help anyone, you know, very happy to kind of give some advice on what we did, although it seems that some of these things are very much in hand. The second thing was just to respond to what Joe was saying about the communal contribution. I've been chairing over the last month or so a task force on the communal contribution. And I think that two things come out of it. First of all, yes, this point about making sure that deputies have consulted, and we spoke a bit about that before in terms of the board manifesto, and in other ways, you know, is helpful. And to give due credit, Daniel Sugarman has already been in touch with me, working hard on a Sunday, the staff team, very well worth praising them. But secondly, one of the things that's really come out of that group, and thanks to all of the people who are involved in it, is that we want to really support deputies with proactive marketing, which includes HO visits, which includes materials that go to you. Sheila mentioned some of the stuff that Jeffrey Norman has done and some of the projects that the board done that are really popular throughout the space. So hopefully over the coming months, what we'll be doing is helping tool you up to make the case on the communal contribution. At 58 pence a week, it is extremely good value. Yeah, hopefully it will help everyone to get it paid.
Wonderful. Madam President, all done, on time, on budget.
Thank you. I think it's fair to say that we discussed an awful lot this meeting, and I want to thank so many people for coming forward to ask questions that don't usually speak. Do you know, I've been talking to myself. There we are. I want to thank everybody this morning, because I think we've spoken about so many things, and even if people don't entirely agree, I think it's really important that everybody has a chance to contribute, and it's really important to encourage people that haven't spoken before and to bring them in and make them know that their views are wanted. It's always difficult with speakers, and we try to fit everybody in, but it's very important that we don't just have the same people speaking, and that people are encouraged to contribute to the community, because that's the only way that we can all carry on, work together, have the next generation being involved, and it gives people confidence if they're asked to speak, and they're not just waiting at the end if they haven't really spoken before. It doesn't always work perfectly, and it's difficult on Zoom when you're also trying to run a meeting do all those things as well. So apologies if anybody feels that they weren't called at the right time, but we're all doing our best. Can I say thank you for all of the work that you've done. Thank you to the tech team, thank you to the board staff, and last but not least, to Michael Uyghur and all of the HOs for your time this Sunday morning. For those of you that are going away soon, have a fantastic holiday and summer break. And thank you for all of the work that you do. It's all very much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you. And can staff please